May 20th, 1900, Volume 3. All things have their origin from nothing. Necessity of rest and of interior silence. Finding myself outside of myself, it seemed to me it was night time, and I could see the whole universe, the whole order of nature, the starry heaven, the silence of the night. In sum, it seemed to me that everything had a meaning. While seeing this, I seemed to see our Lord, who, beginning to speak about what I was seeing, said, "All nature invites one to rest. But what is true rest? It is the interior rest and the silence of all that is not God. Look at the stars, twinkling with tempered light, not dazzling like the sun. The sleep and the silence of all nature, of men and also of animals. They all look for a place, a den in which to be in silence and rest from the tiredness of life. If this is necessary for the body, much more is it necessary for the soul to rest in her own center, which is God. But in order to be able to rest in God, interior silence is necessary, just as exterior silence is necessary to the body in order to peacefully fall asleep. But what is this interior silence? It is to silence one's own passions by keeping them in their place. It is to impose silence on desires, on inclinations, on affections, in sum, on all that does not call upon God. Now, what is the means to reach this? The only means, and absolutely necessary, is for the soul to undo her own being and reduce herself to nothing, just as she was before being created. And once she has reduced her being to nothing, she must take it again in God. My daughter, all things have their origin from nothing. If this very machine of the universe which you are admiring with its great order had been full of other things before I created it, I could not have put my creative hand to make it with such great mastery, and to render it so splendid and adorned. At the most, I could have undone everything that might have been there, to then redo it according to my liking. But we always come to this: all of my works have their origin from nothing. And when there is a mixing with other things, it is not decorous for my majesty to descend and operate in the soul. But when the soul reduces herself to nothing and rises to me, and takes her being within mine, then I operate as the God that I am, and the soul finds true rest. And here is how all virtues, from humility to the annihilation of oneself, begin. Who can say how much I understood about what blessed Jesus told me? Oh, how happy my soul would be if I could reach the point of undoing my poor being, to be able to receive from my God his divine being. Oh, how I would ennoble myself, how sanctified I would be. But what foolishness is mine? Where is my brain, if still I do not do it? What a human misery! Instead of looking for its true good and taking wing on high, it contents itself with scrabbling on the ground, and with living amidst mud and rot. After this, my beloved Jesus transported me inside a garden in which there were many people preparing themselves to attend a feast, but only those who received a uniform were able to attend, and few were those who received this uniform. A great yearning arose in me to receive one, and I did so much that I obtained the intent. So as I reached the place in which one would receive it, a venerable, matronly woman clothed me in white first, and then placed on me a pale blue shoulder band, on which a medal was hanging with the imprint of the face of Jesus. While being a face, it was also a mirror, and in looking at it, one would detect the slightest stains which the soul, with the help of a light coming from within that face, could easily remove. It seemed to me that the metal contained a mysterious meaning. Then she took a mantle of finest gold and covered me all over. It seemed to me that dressed in this way I could compete with the virgins in heaven. While this was happening, Jesus told me, "My daughter, let us go back to see what men are doing. It is enough for you to be dressed. When the feast begins, I will take you there to attend." So after we went round for a little while, he transported me inside my bed. May 20th, 1903, Volume 5. Luisa offers her life for the Church and for the triumph of the truth. As I was in my usual state, I found myself outside of myself with blessed Jesus in my arms, in the midst of many people who, with irons, swords, and knives, were trying, some to beat, some to wound, some to cut off the members of our Lord. But as much as they did and tried, they could cause no harm. On the contrary, their very irons, as sharp and cutting as they were, lost all their activity and became inoperative. Jesus and I were highly afflicted at seeing the brutality of those inhuman hearts, which, though they saw that they could do nothing, would yet repeat the blows in order to succeed in their intent. And if they caused no harm, it was because they were unable to. They became angry because their weapons had become useless, and they were unable to carry out their resolute will to do harm to our Lord. And they said to themselves, "Why are we unable to do anything? What is the cause?" It seems that other times we were able to do something, but as we find ourselves in the arms of this one here, we can do nothing. Let us try and see whether we can do harm to her and get her out of the way. While they were saying this, Jesus withdrew to my side and gave them freedom to do what they wanted. But before they laid hands on me, I said, "Lord, I offer my life for the Church and for the triumph of the truth. Accept, I pray you, my sacrifice." Then they took a sword and cut my head off. Blessed Jesus accepted my sacrifice. But while they were doing this, in the act of making the sacrifice, to my highest sorrow, I found myself inside myself. I thought I had reached the place of my desires, but I remained disappointed. May 20th, 1905, Volume 6, The Way of Suffering of Jesus. This morning I was thinking of when blessed Jesus remained all dislocated on the cross, and I said to myself, "Ah, Lord, how tormented you must have been by suffering so atrocious, and how afflicted your soul must have been." At that moment, almost like a shadow, he came and told me, "My daughter, I did not occupy myself with my sufferings, but rather I occupied myself with the purpose of my pains. And since in my pains I could see the will of the Father fulfilled, I suffered, and in my very suffering I found the sweetest rest. In fact, doing the divine will contains this good. While one suffers, one finds the most beautiful rest. And if one enjoys, but this enjoyment is not wanted by God, in the very enjoyment one finds the most atrocious torment. Even more, the closer I would come to the end of the pains, yearning to fulfill the will of the Father in everything, the more relieved I would feel, and my rest would become more beautiful. Oh, how different is the way of souls! If they suffer or operate, their gaze is neither on the fruit which they can obtain, nor on the fulfillment of the divine will. Rather, they concentrate all of themselves on the thing that they are doing, and not seeing the goods which they can earn or the sweet rest that the will of God brings, they live bothered and tormented, and they shun suffering and operating as much as they can, thinking of finding rest, but they remain more tormented than before. May 20th, 1909, Volume 9. Love for God surpasses everything. Continuing in my usual state, he just barely made himself seen in a flash of light, and he told me, "My daughter, there is nothing that can surpass love, neither doctrine nor dignity, and much less nobility. At the most, one who uses those for the good of making speculations around my being can know me more or less, but who reaches the point of making of me his own object? Love. Who reaches the point of eating me as one does with food? Love. One who loves me devours me. One who loves me finds my being identified with each particle of his being. There is as much difference between one who really loves me and the others, whatever their conditions or qualities might be, as between one who knows a precious object, appreciates it, esteems it, but it does not belong to him, and one who possesses that precious object as his own. Who is more fortunate between these, the one who knows it or the one who possesses it? Certainly the one who possesses it. So love makes up for doctrine and surpasses it. It makes up for dignity and surpasses all dignities, providing one with divine dignity. It makes up for everything and surpasses everything. May 20th, 1918, Volume 12. Everything is concentrated in the will of God. Continuing in my usual state, I was saying to my sweet Jesus, "How I wish I had your desires, your love, your affections, your heart, and so forth, to be able to desire, to love, and so forth as you do." And my always lovable Jesus told me, "My daughter, I do not have desires or affections, but everything is concentrated in my will. My will is everything in me. Those who cannot desire, but I can everything. Those who do not have love wish to love, but in my will there is fullness, the font of true love. And since I am infinite, in one simple act of my will I possess all goods, which overflowing from my being descend for the good of all. If I had desires, I would be unhappy. I would lack something. But I possess everything. Therefore I am happy, and I make everyone happy. Being infinite means having the power to do everything, to possess everything, to make everything happy. The creature who is finite does not possess everything, nor can she embrace everything. This is why she has desires, anxieties, affections, and so forth, which she can use as many steps in order to ascend to her Creator, lap up his divine qualities, and be filled so much as to overflow for the good of others. But if the soul concentrates all of herself in my will, dissolving herself completely in my volition, then she will not just lap up my qualities, but in one single gulp she will absorb me into herself. She will no longer have her own desires and affections in herself, but only the life of my will, which, dominating her completely, will make everything disappear from her, and will make my will reappear in everything. May 20th, 1928, Volume 24, Divine Messengers. The Celestial Circular. The acts done in the divine will form the ecstasy of the Creator. Necessity of the continuation of acts how they form many hours to call for the dawn. The Virgin, dawn of redemption. I was concerned because of a circular I received from the House of the Divine Will, so much wanted by Venerable Father de Francia, and so longed for by him, who did not have the consolation of seeing it completed and opened for the purpose wanted by him. And now, finally, according to what the circular said, the day of its completion, probably near, was arising. So I thought to myself, is it really true that it is will of God for me to go there? And the members of this house, will they be the true little daughters of the divine will? Will they be the beginning of the rising of the divine era of the kingdom of the supreme Fiat upon earth? But while I was thinking of this and other things, my sweet Jesus moved in my interior and told me, my daughter, each saying, work, and sacrifice that is done in my will is to obtain its divine kingdom. There are many messengers sent to the celestial fatherland that carry the divine circular and make it circulate through all the saints, the angels, the sovereign queen, and the creator himself, giving to each one the task to prepare the different things that are needed for a kingdom so holy, so that everything may be done with decorum, with decency, and with divine nobility. So all the inhabitants of the divine fatherland, with this celestial circular in their hands, all get down to the work of fulfilling their task, of preparing each thing assigned to them. So the circular from earth echoes the celestial circular, and heaven and earth move, occupying themselves with the one purpose of the kingdom of my divine will, the earth, with all that is needed in the natural order, the celestial court, with all that pertains to the supernatural order. It seems that heaven and earth hold hands and compete with each other to see who hastens more to prepare a kingdom so holy. If you knew what value one act done in my will contains, how it can move heaven and earth, how it can open its way everywhere. It places itself in communication with everyone and obtains everything that was not obtained through all acts together and for centuries. These acts are not one sun, but as many suns for as many acts as are performed, that form the refulgent and radiant day of the kingdom of my will upon earth. The acts done in it are spurs to the Supreme Being. They are magnets that attract it. They are sweet chains that bind it. They are raptures in which the creature has the power to form the ecstasy of her Creator, who, enraptured as though in a sweet sleep by the ecstasy formed by his beloved creature, concedes what he wanted to give from many centuries. But he had not found she who, making him ecstatic with his very divine power, would be the capturer of the kingdom of his divine will. As the creature moves in my fiat and forms her act, God feels enraptured, and in his sweet drowsiness he feels disarmed and conquered, and the creature becomes the winner over her Creator. With these preparations, it happens as to a groom who, having to marry, prepares the house, the bedroom, and all the objects that are needed so that nothing may be lacking to him. Then he goes on with the attire for the wedding, and the invitations are sent out. All this makes the groom decide to carry out what he himself wanted. But if nothing is prepared, the groom takes time and never makes up his mind. And he himself feels embarrassed and says to himself, I must marry, and I don't have a house. I don't have the bed in which to sleep. I don't have the attire to appear as a groom. What impression will I make? And by necessity he gives up any thought of becoming a spouse. In the same way, these preparations, the acts done in my will, the circulars, are spurs that move my will to come to reign in the midst of creatures. And my knowledges are like the groom who comes to marry the creatures with new bonds, just as they came out of our creative hands. Afterwards, I was feeling tired, exhausted from the privations of my sweet Jesus. I felt that my poor and little soul could take no more without him in whom I had centered all my hopes and the whole of my very life. Without him, everything I did that was taught to me by Jesus seemed to be a game, prayers from the imagination, not of glory for God. And so I felt such listlessness in doing my round that I could barely go on. But while exhausted, I continued my round. I felt that Jesus, sustaining me, was pushing me from behind, telling me, "My daughter, continue on. Do not want to stop. You must know that everything has been determined by the Supreme Being. Prayers, acts, pains, sighs, that the creature must do in order to obtain what we ourselves want to give her, and that she longs to receive. So if these acts are not performed, the longed-for sun does not rise from us in the midst of the long night of the human will, to form the day of the kingdom of the divine Fiat. This is why many times it happens that many acts and prayers are done and nothing is obtained. But then because of one more little sigh and prayer, one obtains what he so much longed for. Was it perhaps the last act to obtain the deed of grace? Ah, no, it was the continuation of all the acts and prayers. And if it appears that it is obtained through that last act, it is because that one was needed to complete the number established by us. So, if you want to receive the kingdom of the divine will, do not stop. Otherwise, since the long chain of acts that reaches up to the throne of God would be missing, you will not obtain what you want and what we want to give. The acts are like the hours that form the day or the night. Each hour has its place. Some hours form the evening, others the deep night, others the dawn, others the rising of the sun, others the full day. And if it is the midnight hour, in vain would one expect to see the sun rise. It is necessary that at least the dawn come to court the nearing day, in order to see the majesty of the sun that dispels the darkness with its empire of light, and putting an end to the night, pearls all nature, and makes it rise again in its light and in its heat, molding everything with its beneficial effects. Now, is it perhaps the dawn that has all the honor for making the sun rise? Ah, no, the dawn has been the last hour. But if the other hours had not preceded it, the dawn could never have said, "I am she who calls for the day." Such are the acts, the prayers to obtain the rising of the day of the kingdom of my divine will. They are like many hours, and each one has its place of honor, and they hold hands among themselves in calling the refulgent sun of my divine will. The final act can be like the dawn, and if it is not performed, the dawn will be missing, and it is useless to hope for its day of light to arise soon upon the earth, which, molding and warming everything more than sun, will make its beneficial effects and its divine regime felt, a regime of light, of love, and of sanctity. The same happened in redemption. Redemption did not come for many centuries, because the patriarchs and the prophets found themselves with their acts in the night hours, and from afar they longed for the day. As the Queen Virgin came, she formed the dawn, and embracing all the night hours together, she made the day of the Word arise upon earth, and redemption was accomplished. Therefore do not stop. The series of acts is so necessary that there is the risk that, if not all of them are performed, the desired good is not obtained. May 20th, 1930, Volume 28, How All Creation is a Member of God, and How It Participates in All the Divine Qualities. The Divine Will, gatherer of all the acts that belong to it. I was following, according to my usual way, the acts of the divine will in the creation. I comprehend that it is so united with its Creator as to seem like a member that enjoys the union with its body, and by virtue of this union, the member feels the warmth, the motion, the life. But while I was thinking of this, my always lovable Jesus told me, "My daughter, each created thing is one distinct member of mine, and as such, I use it to maintain the order, the life of creation. And I use it in order to make use, by means of it, now of mercy, now of my power, and now of my justice. More so since, the creation being immersed in my divine will, it cannot move or operate if my divine fiat does not give it the motion or the attitude of operating. Now, just as the creation, so is the creature a member of God, and as long as she remains united with God, she participates in all the qualities of God, like a member attached to the body participates in the circulation of the blood, in the warmth, in the motion of the same body. But who maintains this union as steady, and this member of the creature attached to her Creator, as permanent and in full vigor? My divine will. My will is bond of union and communication of warmth and of motion, in such a way as to make her feel at each motion the life of her Creator, and it places, more than blood, the divine sanctity, the strength, the love, the goodness, in sum, all the qualities of her Creator, in circulation with this member. But if my will is not there, it will be a detached member that cannot flow to the communication of the body, and if in appearance it seems united, it will be like a paralyzed member that will live with difficulty, without motion, and it will be of bother and of sorrow for the divine head to have a member and not to be able to communicate the good of its life." After this he added, "My daughter, my divine will is the gatherer of everything that belongs to it. Jealous of its acts, it does not disperse a single one of them, because each of its acts contains an infinite act, one whole entire eternity, an interminability that never ends. Therefore they are acts not subject to being dispersed. And when my fiat forms its acts, the love, the jealousy for its act is so great that it keeps it on its lap of light as glory and triumph of the power of its operating. Now, when the soul lives in my divine will and encloses her acts in it, she becomes an act of divine will, and then she repeats for herself all the acts that the divine will does, and she gives it the glory, the requital of its divine acts. And oh, how my divine fiat feels triumphant of this creature, finding in her a pure act of its will, and it makes itself the gatherer of everything that this creature can do. It does not disperse even one breath, because in everything it finds its operating will, and this is enough in order for it to have acts worthy of it. And it loves her so much that it keeps her clasped in its lap of light, to give her the continuous life of its volition, and to receive from her the requital of it. Therefore, my daughter, be attentive to receive this life of divine will, so as to be able to say, "Life of divine will you give me, and life of divine will I give you." May 20th, 1934, Volume 33. The divine will devours everything as within a single breath, all the acts done in it, and it forms of them one alone. The divine will forms the covering of the humanity of our Lord, and makes it present to creatures. I felt poor, poor of love, but with the will of wanting to love him very much, very much. I had received sweet Jesus sacramentally, and he was as drowned by love, and I hardly had some little drop, and yet he asked me for love in order to give me love. But what to do in order to be able to match him in some way? Then I thought to myself, my celestial mamma wants that I love my and her Jesus very much. Therefore these little drops of my love, I want to pour them into her seas of love, and so I will give to him, and I will tell him, I love you so much that I love you as your mamma loves you. Now it seemed to me that the sovereign lady rejoiced and felt happy that her daughter loved Jesus with her love, and he even more content because he felt loved by me with the love of his mamma. And all content he told me, "My little daughter of my volition, you must know that for one who lives in my fiat, she is never alone in her acts. She is incorporated into everything that it has done, does, and will do, as much in itself as in all creatures, such that I felt in the love of my mother the love of my daughter, and in the love of the daughter the love of my divine mother." Oh, how beautiful were your tiny little drops of love, invested by the seas of love of my mamma. For one who lives in my volition, I feel heaven flow in her acts, in her love, in her will, and I feel the creature in heaven, and her acts, her love, her will, invest the empyrean, invade every one, and form one single act, one single love, and one single will. And the whole of heaven feels itself loved, glorified in the creature, and she feels herself loved by the whole of heaven. In my will everything is unity. Separability does not exist, nor does distance of places or times exist. The centuries disappear in my volition, and with its power it devours everything in one single breath, and forms one single continuous act of everything. What fortune for one who lives in my volition, because she can say, "I do what one in heaven does, and my love is not dissimilar to their love." Only for one who does not live in my volition are her acts separable. They suffer solitude, and are dissimilar to our acts, because not being invested by its power that has the virtue of converting into light what one does in it, therefore not being light, they cannot incorporate themselves with the acts of our will, which, being inaccessible light, know how to convert everything into light. And it is no marvel that light and light incorporate themselves together. Therefore I am abandoned in the arms of baby Jesus. So he made himself seen, and he, drowned with love, abandoned himself in mine, in order to enjoy the love that I gave him of his and my mamma. And then he added, "My daughter, if you see me a little baby, it is the virtue of my divine will that possesses in itself all the periods of my life, my tears, my sufferings, and everything that I did down here. Therefore, in every instant it repeats the different periods of my life, in order to give its admirable effects to creatures. And now it forms me as a baby in order to give them the fruits of my infancy, my most tender love that I arrive at crying in order to have love from them, and to let me receive the tenderness, the compassion for my tears. Now it forms me as a little boy with an enchanting beauty, in order to make me known and to enrapture them to loving me. Now as a young man, in order to enchant them with inseparable union. Now crucified, in order to make me repair and forgive. And the same for all the rest of the life of my humanity down here. O insuperable power and love of my will! What I did in the little round of 33 years, then departing I left for heaven. It will do it for centuries and centuries, keeping my life ready to give to every creature. Now you must know that if the Holy Church has the great honor of having souls who had the good of seeing me, of hearing me speak, as if I were again living together with them, everything is owed to my divine will. It is what forms my covering and makes me as present to creatures. My humanity is enclosed in its immensity, and in virtue of it has the present act, as if in act I am born, and it gives me the covering of a baby. I am growing, and it gives me the covering of a little boy. All my life was in its power, and it forms of it what it wants to give me. In whatever age it wants to show me, it forms my coverings and maintains my whole life as present act in the midst of creatures. My will has your Jesus living, and according to their dispositions, so it gives me the covering and gives me to them, and lets them feel that I cry, I suffer, I continue to be born and to die, and I burn with love because I want to be loved. What does my will not do? It does everything. There is nothing in which it does not have its primacy, the conservative virtue, and the perfect and continuous equilibrium, without ever ceasing, of all our works. My daughter, with my sorrow I say that what is lacking is the knowledge about what my adorable will does, the great good that it continually offers to creatures, and therefore it wants to be known. And because it is not known, it is neither appreciated nor loved, and they do not give the primacy to all our works, while my will is the primary font, and all our works are as so many little fountains that receive and draw the life and goods that they give to creatures. Oh, if it were known what will of God means, the good that it brings to creatures, the earth would be transformed and so enticed that one would remain with his gaze fixed at looking at it and to receiving its perennial goods. But since it is not known, they do not even think about it. And they partly lose its goods because they want it or they do not want it. They know or they do not know. They believe or they do not believe us. It is my divine fiat that gives life, motion, and everything. It is the motive of all creation. And therefore I love so much that what it does and it can do, all its divine history, be known, in order to be able to lavish with new gifts, and display in love with more abundance toward creatures, that in order to do this I have wanted the sacrifice of your life, sacrifice that I have not asked of anyone, sacrifice that has cost you so much. Although you calculate this sacrifice when the obstacles, circumstances arose, yet I calculate all the days. I measure the intensity, the hardness, and the loss of daily life to which you submitted yourself. Good daughter, this sacrifice of yours was necessary for my will, in order to make itself known. In order to give its knowledges, it wanted to make use of you as a channel in order to make itself known, and your sacrifice as powerful weapon in order to let itself conquer, in order to unveil itself, to open its bosom of light and manifest who it is. Even more because the creature, by doing his human will, rejected and lost the life of the divine will. Therefore it was necessary that a creature would submit herself to the sacrifice of losing her life, losing the mastery of herself, in order to have that my volition would move itself, to make itself known, so as to restore its divine life. It is always so in our operating. When we want to superabound even more toward the creature, we ask the sacrifice of one creature as pretext, and then we make known the good that we want to do, and the good is given according to the knowledges that they acquire. Therefore be attentive, and do not want to occupy yourself with useless thoughts of the reason for your state. It was necessary for our will, and that is enough, and you should be content and thank it. May 20th, 1936, Volume 34. Difference that passes between one who calls the divine will in her acts and one who does good works without it. The Ascension. How he departed for heaven and remained on earth. My poor mind continues to go around in the acts of the divine will, and I thought to myself, what is the difference between one who calls the divine will in her acts and those who do good works and do not call it? They do not give it the first place in their acts. And my sweet Jesus, making me his brief little visit, told me, my daughter, there is no comparison between the one and the other. The first one, by calling my will in her acts, strips herself of what is human, and forms the void in her human volition for where to give a place to mine. Mine embellishes, sanctifies, forms its light in that void. Then it pronounces its creating fiat, and calls to life its divine operation in the human. And the creature not only participates, but she remains proprietor of the divine act that possesses the power, the immensity, the sanctity, and the divine value that is never exhausted. Therefore, in one who lives in our volition, we look at and find ourselves and our acts that honor us and make a crown for us. On the other hand, those who do good works but not animated by our volition, we do not find ourselves but the finite act of the creature. And since we ourselves do not know where to hold anything of whatever good that they do, we give them the merit as daily wage. The daily wage is not a property that can always produce. Therefore they symbolize those who live day to day, who, although they live with hardship from the daily wage that they have, yet never become rich. They always feel the need of being paid for their labors in order to live. And if they do not labor, they run the danger of dying of hunger, that is to say, do not feel the satiety of good, the life of the virtues, but the squalid misery of the passions. On the other hand, for one who lives in our volition, everything is abundance. We tell her, take what you want, and take as much as you can. Rather, we place at your disposition our riches, our light, our sanctity, our love, because what is ours is yours, and what is yours is ours. Nothing else remains but to live and operate together. After this, I was accompanying the ascension of Jesus into heaven. How beautiful he was, all majesty, dressed with the most resplendent light that enraptured and enchanted hearts to love him. And my sweet Jesus, all goodness and love, told me, my blessed daughter, there is nothing that deals with my life that does not symbolize the kingdom of my divine will. On this day of my ascension, I felt victorious and triumphant. My sufferings were already finished. Rather, I left my sufferings already suffered in the midst of my children, whom I left on earth for help, for strength, and for support, and as refuge for where to hide in their sufferings, so as to draw from mine the heroism in their sacrifices. I can say that I left my sufferings, my examples, and my own life as sowing, that, maturing and growing, would make the kingdom of my divine will arise. In fact, I departed and I remained. I remained in virtue of my sufferings. I remained in their hearts in order to be loved. After my most holy humanity rose to heaven, I felt more tightly the bond of the human family, so that I would not have to adapt myself to not receiving the love of my children and brothers, whom I left on earth. I remained in the most holy sacrament in order to continuously give myself to them, and they to give themselves to me, in order to let them find the rest, the relief, and the remedy for all their needs. Our works do not suffer from changeability. What we do one time, we repeat always. In addition to this, on this day of my ascension, I had a double crown. The crown of my children, whom I brought with me into the celestial fatherland, and the crown of my children, whom I left on earth, symbol of the few who will begin the kingdom of my divine will. All those who saw me ascend to heaven received so many graces that everyone gave his life in order to make the kingdom of the redemption known, and they cast the foundations in order to form my church, so as to gather all the human generations into her maternal womb. The same for the first children of the kingdom of my will. They will be few, but the graces with which they will be invested will be such and so many that they will give their lives in order to call everyone to live in this holy kingdom. A cloud of light invested me that took my presence away from the sight of the disciples, who remained as enraptured in watching my person. So much was the enchantment of my beauty that it kept their pupils enraptured, so much so that they did not know how to lower them to look at the earth, so much so that an angel was needed to shake them and make them return to the cenacle. This, too, is a symbol of the kingdom of my volition. Such and so much will be the light that will invest its first children, that they will carry the beauty, the enchantment, the peace of the divine Fiat, in a way that they will easily surrender themselves to wanting to know and to love a good so great. Now, in the midst of the disciples, there was my mamma, who assisted at my departure for heaven. This is the most beautiful symbol. Just as she is the queen of my church, she assists it, she protects it, she defends it, so she will sit in the midst of the children of my will. She will always be the engine, the life, the guide, the perfect model, the teacher of the kingdom of the divine Fiat that remains so close to her heart. They are her anxieties, her ardent desires, her deliriums of maternal love, because she wants her children on earth in the kingdom where she lived. She is not content that she has her children in heaven in the kingdom of the divine will, but she wants them also on earth. She feels that she has not completed the task given to her by God as mother and queen. As long as the divine will does not reign on earth in the midst of creatures, her mission is not finished. She wants her children who are like her and who possess the inheritance of their mamma. So the great lady is all eye in order to look, all heart in order to love, so as to help the one whom she sees in some way disposed that they want to live of divine will. Therefore, in the difficulties, think that she is around you. She sustains you. She fortifies you. She takes your volition in her maternal hands in order to make it receive the life of the supreme Fiat. End of May 20th. Fiat.